He thought he'd seen everything money could buy, until a stranger knelt beside a weeping boy and reminded him what it means to care. On a rainy evening in Manchester, a nurse paused for a child and unknowingly rewrote the next chapter of her own life. You're watching Tales with Tears, the world's most touching storytelling channel in English. Let's begin. Manchester, England, late April. The rain had just stopped, and the wet streets glistened beneath amber street lamps like glass beneath candlelight. Clara Bennett tugged her jacket tighter around her scrubs as she stepped out of Northern Royal Hospital after a 12-hour shift. Her shoes were soaked, her back ached, and the knot in her shoulder had been growing for weeks. But for now, there was silence. No alarms, no screaming, just the soft hiss of tires on wet pavement and the distant echo of laughter from a pub around the corner. She headed toward Piccadilly Gardens, cutting through the square on her way to the bus stop. She wasn't in a rush. Her next shift started in less than 12 hours anyway, and she liked walking through the park when it was quiet. There was something sacred about the city in its quieter hours. That's when she heard it. A soft, sharp sniffle, not quite crying. Not yet. She turned, scanning the dim path. Under the skeletal branches of an oak, just beside a rain-slicked bench, sat a boy. No older than 8. His jeans were caked with mud, his shoes soaked, and beside him lay a bicycle so battered it looked like it had fallen from a moving truck. The chain was slack, the front wheel twisted. One of the handlebars was dangling by a thread of wire. Clara approached slowly. "Hey there," she said, keeping her voice light. "You all right?" The boy looked up, wide brown eyes rimmed red from holding back tears. "My bike's broke," he said, "and I was meant to be home by now." "Where's home?" "Gorton, near the Tesco with the red shutters." That was nearly 3 miles away, too far for a boy alone at dusk. "What's your name?" Clara asked, crouching beside him. Leo Simmons." "Hi, Leo. I'm Clara." He nodded, then looked away. "It was my brother's bike. He gave it to me before he went up." Clara didn't ask what up meant. She recognized that phrasing. She'd said it herself once when her father had passed. "Tell you what," she said, examining the bike. "I used to fix bikes with my dad. I can't promise magic, but I can at least get you moving. You know bikes." "I know a little about a lot of broken things," Clara said with a smile. She set her rucksack down, pulled out a penlight, and started inspecting the damage. The derailleur was twisted beyond repair, and the chain had snapped entirely. It would never ride again in its current state. But maybe she could bend the handlebars enough to push it. Maybe they could walk it together. What she didn't notice, what she couldn't possibly have known, was the man watching them from across the square. Inside a dark grey Range Rover parked half in shadow, Ethan Hawthorne sat with his phone forgotten on the console, his Bluetooth call long since disconnected. For 20 minutes he had been sitting there, trying to draft a resignation letter he didn't even intend to send. But when Clara had knelt beside the boy, her coat soaking in the wet grass, her voice low and gentle, Ethan had stopped everything. He didn't know why he hadn't driven off. He had meetings, calls, deadlines. But none of that mattered, not when he was watching something that felt achingly rare. Kindness, pure and uncalculated. Not kindness posted on social media. Not kindness curated for a corporate press release, just a woman helping a stranger because she could. And then, without entirely meaning to, Ethan got out of the car. His leather shoes sank into the damp gravel. His coat flapped in the breeze. As he crossed the square, Clara looked up sharply, ever cautious, her body stiffening in that way women did when a man approached after dark. "Sorry," he said quickly, hands raised, voice soft. "Didn't mean to startle you." Clara rose to her feet slowly, shielding Leo slightly with her body. "Can I help you?" Ethan stopped 3 paces away. His suit was tailored, his hair too perfect, and his watch flashed subtly under the streetlight. Money. That's what she saw. Money and mystery. I couldn't help noticing, Ethan said, nodding toward the bike. Looks like a rough night. Nothing we can't handle, Clara replied curtly. Leo peered around her, his voice tentative. Do you fix bikes too? Ethan chuckled. No, but I know someone who does. There's a repair shop 2 blocks from here, still open for another hour. Clara narrowed her eyes. And if you're okay with it, I could give you both a ride. No pressure. The silence stretched. She was exhausted, sore, and her bus wasn't due for another 15 minutes. Is it all right, Clara? Leo asked, his voice small but hopeful. Clara studied the stranger again. His stance wasn't threatening. His smile was warm, but not performative. Something about him felt real. All right, she said finally. But if you try anything, I know how to use a pair of surgical scissors. I'll take my chances, Ethan said with a grin. He walked them to the car, Leo pushing the busted bike with Clara's help, and opened the back seat like it was habit. Leo climbed in eagerly. I'm Ethan, by the way. Clara, she replied, still cautious. And that's Leo. Ethan nodded. Nice to meet you both. They rode in comfortable silence, broken only by Leo's commentary on every flashy car and billboard they passed. When they reached the shop, just as it was closing, Ethan jogged ahead and convinced the owner to stay open a little longer. Clara stood beside Leo, watching the exchange through the rain-fogged glass. Is he famous or something? Leo asked. Not sure yet, Clara murmured. When the shop owner wheeled the bike in, Ethan turned and caught her gaze through the glass. There was no smugness, no bravado, just quiet warmth, a man who wasn't used to being seen and didn't quite know what to do when he was. 30 minutes later, Leo's bike had new wheels, a fixed chain, and even a red reflector light for safety. Ethan paid for it all without blinking. I can't let you, Clara began. You didn't ask me to, he said simply. I wanted to. Leo whooped in joy and rode circles around them on the pavement. Why? Clara asked, arms folded. Ethan looked at her. Because you reminded me that I used to be someone who would have done the same, and I'd like to be that man again. Clara didn't smile. Not yet. But her shoulders dropped just slightly. Well, she said, it's a start. It was nearly midnight by the time Clara got home. Her flat, a modest one-bedroom walk-up in Rusholme, smelled faintly of eucalyptus oil and leftover takeaway. She dropped her rucksack by the door, kicked off her shoes, and sank into the sofa with a groan that echoed through the quiet. The night had felt surreal. Not just the broken bike, or the grateful boy, or the miracle of the repair shop still being open. It was him, Ethan. The name itself felt like something out of a book, sharp, clipped, expensive, and yet he hadn't acted like the men she'd met before. The type who wore wealth like armor, who led with their status, who made you feel small just by walking into the room. Ethan had been careful. Not cautious exactly, but attentive, like he was listening to the silence as much as the sound. Clara leaned her head back and closed her eyes. She hadn't dated in years. There hadn't been time. Between her shifts, helping her mother and trying to pay off her nursing loans, her life had shrunk into something functional, predictable, and small. But tonight, something had cracked open. The next morning, she found a text on her phone from unknown number. Hi, it's Ethan. I hope Leo got home safely and that you got some sleep. I'd like to buy you a proper coffee sometime if that's all right. No bike repairs involved. Just you, me, and maybe a muffin if you're feeling wild. Clara stared at the screen, her heart skipping in a way she hated. She was too old to be flustered, too tired to be swept into anything. But she typed back anyway. Clara, one coffee, no muffins, and only if you're not secretly married or running for Parliament. His reply was immediate. Ethan, promise. No scandalous secrets, just a man who forgot how to be curious about life until he saw you kneel in the rain for a stranger. They met 3 days later at a tiny cafe near the university. Clara arrived first, wearing her backup jeans and the only jumper she owned without a hole in it. She told herself it wasn't a date, just coffee, just conversation. Then he walked in, and even the barista did a double take. He wasn't in a suit today, just dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, and a navy coat that somehow looked both effortless and undeniably expensive. But his smile when he saw her, that part wasn't polished. It was warm, human, real. "You came," he said. "You bribed me with caffeine," she replied. They sat by the window. Rain smeared the glass in lazy drizzles as the city moved quietly outside. "So," Clara said, wrapping her hands around the mug, "what do you do when you're not haunting parks in luxury SUVs?" Ethan chuckled. "I run a company." "What kind?" He hesitated, not from shame, but from habit. "Tech investments mostly," he said. "We back startups, restructure failing firms, manage portfolios." Sounds intense. It can be. Mostly it's strategic, numbers, risk, returns. "And do you like it?" The question seemed to surprise him. No one ever asks that. "I'm not no one." Ethan looked down at his cup. "I used to, when I thought winning meant something. And now? Now it feels like collecting sand. It piles up, but it doesn't hold its shape." Clara studied him. There was a weariness in his eyes, not from exhaustion, but from knowing too much too young. "What did you want to be?" she asked. "Before the money, before the suits?" He smiled, almost embarrassed. "An architect. I used to draw buildings in the margins of my textbooks." "Why didn't you?" "My father didn't believe in art. He believed in equity." There it was, the weight of legacy. They talked for over an hour about small things, big things, funny things, nothing and everything. By the end, Clara had learned that Ethan loved obscure jazz records, had once broken his collarbone playing rugby at Eton, and had never eaten a Cornish pasty from a corner shop. "And you?" he asked. "Always wanted to be a nurse." She nodded. "I wanted to be the person who stayed. The one who doesn't leave when things get hard. That's rare." "Not in my line of work," she replied. "It's all we do, stay, even when it breaks us." They parted on the street outside. Rain again, soft and misty. "Can I see you again?" Ethan asked. "I think so," Clara said. "But just so we're clear, if this is some billionaire makes over the working girl fantasy, I'm not interested." "Good," he replied, "because I'm not interested in fixing you." "Then what are you interested in?" Ethan looked at her like he was seeing something he didn't want to blink away. "Knowing what your laugh sounds like when it's not followed by an apology." Clara didn't answer. She just turned, smiling to herself as she walked into the rain. By the 3rd week they were meeting almost daily. Not always formally. Sometimes he brought her soup on her lunch breaks, or she met him at the gallery he liked to wander after meetings. Once he showed up outside her building with a crate of books she'd once mentioned liking, all second-hand, all marked with tiny yellow tags. "You take notes in the margins?" she'd asked. "I used to," he replied, "until I forgot how to slow down." One night they cooked together in her flat. He was terrible at chopping onions, so she teased him until he set the knife down and kissed her. It wasn't fireworks or music swelling. It was better, quiet, certain, right. But beneath all of it, a current of fear ran through Clara. She hadn't told her mother. She hadn't told her co-workers, not because she was ashamed, but because she didn't know what this was. What it meant to care for someone who had never struggled to pay rent, who had a different suit for each day of the week and still kept his laundry done by someone else. How do you explain that kind of closeness? And could she ever belong in his world? Then came the day she would find out. A call at the hospital, an invitation she wasn't sure she should have accepted. A charity ball, black tie, exclusive, hosted by Ethan's company at the Midland Hotel. He wanted her there. "Don't come as anyone but yourself," he'd said. "That's the whole point." Clara stood in her room the night before the event, holding the dress he'd sent. Simple, elegant, dark green, like a forest at midnight. She wasn't sure who she was in this moment, but she knew she was about to find out. The lobby of the Midland Hotel shimmered with light and sound. Gold accents, polished marble, glass chandeliers that seemed to float like ghosts above the crowd. Clara stood at the threshold in her borrowed heels, her breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her throat. This wasn't her world. This was a painting come to life, people dressed like secrets, conversations carried on in hushed tones and expensive cologne. She felt like she had wandered onto a film set where everyone else knew their lines, and she'd left her script at home. Then she saw him, Ethan, in a classic black tuxedo, hair combed back, his expression softening the moment their eyes met. He wove through the crowd with the confidence of someone born to these rooms, but tonight, none of that confidence felt distant. It felt directed at her. "You came," he said, offering his arm. "You asked," she replied, slipping her fingers through the crook of his elbow. As they walked deeper into the ballroom, the gazes began. Casual at first, then curious, and eventually sharp. Clara could feel it, the mental arithmetic, the "what's she doing here" glances, the "is she an investor or his niece" smirks. Ethan leaned toward her. "Second floor, third table on the left," he whispered. "That's my board chairman. He's wondering if you're an up-and-coming MP or a political statement." "Ah, I'm a nurse from Rusholme," she whispered back. He grinned. "Even better." The night moved slowly and then all at once. Introductions blurred together. Business partners, minor royalty, influencers with names Clara had only seen in passing headlines. Everyone had a pitch, a cause, a reason they mattered. She said little, smiled often, and tried not to flinch when the champagne tray passed her for the 5th time. She was beginning to count the minutes until she could slip out quietly, until she arrived. Vivian Hawthorne, Ethan's sister, a decade older, razor-sharp in a backless silver gown, and every inch the heiress. Vivian approached with the kind of grace that made people step aside instinctively. Her greeting kiss to Ethan was a soft brush of cheeks. Her gaze on Clara, however, was direct and surgical. "So this is the famous Clara," she said, voice velvet with an edge. "I've heard so much." Clara held her ground. "Nothing libelous, I hope." Vivian arched a brow, clearly impressed. Ethan stepped in. "Viv, this is Clara Bennett. Clara, my sister Vivian." "You're a nurse?" Vivian asked. "I am." "And how are you finding all this?" Clara looked around. "A bit like wearing someone else's shoes. Beautiful, but I'm not sure they fit." Vivian smiled, not warmly, but genuinely. "Good answer." As she turned to greet someone else, Ethan let out a breath. "She likes you." That was her version of liking someone. "Oh yes," he said, "you passed." Later that night, as the string quartet slowed to a quieter tune and most of the high-profile guests had either left or retreated to after-parties, Clara found herself standing with Ethan on the hotel balcony. The city stretched out before them, wet, loud, alive. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. Ethan turned. "What do you mean? You could be with anyone. You've probably been with everyone. You know this world. I don't." "I don't care about this world," he said softly. "Then why stay in it?" "Because it's all I've ever known, and because changing it from the inside might be the only way it ever changes." Clara nodded slowly. "But I'm not like them." "Exactly. She turned away, folding her arms against the cold. You know how many people tonight looked at me and saw someone temporary? I don't care what they saw. I do, Clara admitted. Not because I need their approval, but because if I'm going to be in your life, I need to be in it, not an ornament, not an exception. Ethan stepped closer. You're not an exception, Clara. You're the reason. For what? For everything that comes next. 2 days later, Clara walked into the Northern Royal break room to find the TV playing a morning talk show. On screen, a grainy paparazzi photo from the ball. Ethan in tuxedo, Clara by his side. And rumors continue to swirl about Ethan Hawthorne's mysterious date to Saturday's gala, the host was saying. Some say she's an NHS nurse, which would be quite a shift from his usual. Clara turned the screen off. She didn't need a reminder that the whole world now knew her name. At lunch, her colleague Abby grinned and raised a brow. So, you and Ethan Hawthorne? Please don't, Clara groaned. Are you kidding? You're the Florence Nightingale of high society right now. You're trending. I didn't ask for that. You didn't need to. You walked into a room full of lions and didn't flinch. I was flinching. No one saw that part, Abby said. They just saw a woman who belonged, even if she didn't know it yet. That night, Ethan showed up at her door. No tuxedo, no chauffeur. Just him, in jeans, holding a steaming takeaway bag. I figured you could use something that doesn't come with garnish, he said. They ate on the sofa, watched old black and white films, fell asleep with their hands tangled, her head on his chest. It felt easy. For once it felt normal, but the world outside was anything but. By morning, the photos had gone viral. By afternoon, Clara's old schoolmates had begun messaging her. Some with curiosity, others with envy, a few with veiled cruelty. By the end of the week, Ethan had to ask her a question he never wanted to ask. Would you let my PR team help you? Clara hesitated. Why? Because they'll protect you. And because I don't want to watch this world tear you apart the moment you don't smile at the right photographer. Clara bit her lip. This isn't what I wanted. I know. But I do want you. And if this is what comes with that, then I'll do everything I can to make it easier. You can't fix this with money. I'm not trying to fix you. I'm trying to protect you. She looked at him then. Really looked. This wasn't the boy prince of the tabloids. This was a man who had grown up surrounded by knives hidden behind smiles, and for the first time he was letting someone into the space behind the armor. And Clara? She was already inside. The weeks ahead were a blur of press cycles, awkward meetings, and stolen mornings in bed. Clara learned to tune out the noise, to let the love between them be the only voice that mattered. Then, one night, Ethan stood in her kitchen, barefoot, holding a letter. What is it? Clara asked. He handed it to her. It was addressed to Miss Clara Bennett from the Hawthorne Family Trust. An invitation, a proposal. Not for marriage, not yet, but for a legacy. The letter offered Clara a seat on the board of a new foundation, a partnership between the NHS and the Hawthorne Trust, designed to fund medical access in underserved communities, scholarships, supplies, policy reform, named after her, the Clara Bennett Initiative. I don't understand, Clara said, voice barely a whisper. You changed me, Ethan said. You made me remember who I wanted to be before this world got to me, and now I want to build something that matters. With you. Tears welled in her eyes. You don't need to. I want to. She folded the letter, pressed it to her chest, and walked into his arms. I'm terrified, she whispered. Me too. But I want this. So do I. And as they stood in that tiny kitchen, with the rain tapping on the windows and the city buzzing outside, Clara knew something with her whole soul. This wasn't the ending. It was only the beginning. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. It drummed softly on the windows of Clara's new flat, still in Manchester, but a far cry from her tiny one-bedroom in Rusholme. This place had a balcony, actual heating that worked, and a view of the canal that shimmered at night like melted glass. Ethan had insisted on paying the first 6 months' rent. She had insisted on paying him back. She hadn't yet. That morning, she stood in the kitchen making tea, Earl Grey, 2 sugars, while the headlines scrolled silently across her phone screen. Her name again. Her face, paired now not just with Ethan's, but with headlines about the Clara Bennett initiative, already being called one of the most ambitious philanthropic ventures in NHS history. She should have felt proud. Instead, she felt dislocated, like she'd stepped through the wrong door and ended up in someone else's life. Her phone buzzed. It was Lucy, her best friend from nursing school. Lucy, still surviving the billionaire girlfriend saga? Clara smirked. Clara, surviving, dignity mostly intact. Lucy, drinks tonight. I want to see you in the wild again, and I want to quiz you about what rich people really eat for breakfast. Clara, only if you promise to embarrass me in front of strangers. Lucy, you know I live to serve. That evening, Clara found herself at the King's Arms pub in Salford, a no-frills place with sticky tables, dim lights, and the best curry chips in Greater Manchester. The kind of place where no one gave a damn about who you were dating as long as you paid your tab. Lucy was already there, 3/4 through a pint, and halfway into a very aggressive quiz night argument with a team of firefighters. "Clara," she shouted, "settle a debate. Is the capital of Kazakhstan Astana or Nur Sultan?" Clara blinked. "I think they changed the name back to Astana in 2022. Lucy spun around to her opponents. "Ha! We take those points, lads." 2 pints later, Clara's cheeks hurt from laughing. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed this. Being known, being teased, being ordinary. She was halfway through a story about Ethan trying to iron a shirt. He'd never used an iron in his life, when Lucy leaned in more seriously. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Are you happy, Clara?" She hesitated. "I think so." Lucy arched a brow. "That doesn't sound certain." Clara sipped her drink. "I'm overwhelmed. It's like I finally got what I didn't know I wanted, and now I'm terrified I'm going to mess it up." Lucy nodded. "Because it's big. Because it's real." Lucy leaned back. "Then it sounds like it's worth it." Across the city, Ethan sat at a long mahogany table in the Hawthorne Group's top-floor boardroom. It was a quarterly shareholders meeting, but it may as well have been a gladiator match. Vivian sat across from him, dressed in black, calm as a surgeon. To her left, 2 men in bespoke suits who'd spent the last hour raising concerns about the Clara Bennett initiative. "It's not about the cause," said Mr. Carmichael, the group's chief financial officer. "It's about optics. This nurse appears from nowhere, and suddenly she's leading a multi-million-pound foundation under our name." "She didn't appear from nowhere," Ethan said coldly. "She was there when none of you were. She's earned it." "And what does she know about structuring philanthropic endowments?" "She knows what need looks like, which is more than I can say for this room." Vivian finally spoke. "This isn't personal, Ethan. Everything's personal when your name is on the check." Later, after the meeting had adjourned and the boardroom had emptied, Vivian approached him as he stared out at the Manchester skyline. "You need to prepare her," she said softly. "For what?" "For what happens when people realize she doesn't play by the same rules. This world will come for her. Then we'll change the rules." Vivian sighed. "Then she'll need you to hold the line, every day." "I intend to." "Good," she said, and left. That night, Clara returned to her flat to find Ethan waiting outside, leaning against the wall in the rain without an umbrella. "You're soaked," she said, ushering him in. I needed to see you, he replied, before I lost my nerve. Clara closed the door. Nerve for what? Ethan took a breath. There's something I haven't told you. She folded her arms. Okay. It's about my father. She blinked. I thought he passed when you were at uni? He did, but not before leaving me a very specific clause in his will. Ethan ran a hand through his wet hair. If I marry anyone outside of a pre-approved family circle, the board has the legal right to challenge my voting power over the family trust. Clara stared. You're saying if we get married, they can take your company? No, he said, they can try, but if we don't handle it the right way, publicly, strategically, they might succeed. Clara sat down slowly. So this isn't just about us. It's about them. All of them. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to scare you, but that was cowardly. You deserve the truth. She was quiet for a long moment. Do you love me? She asked. Ethan's eyes softened. With everything I have. Then we fight, she said. You don't have to. I want to. He knelt in front of her, not with a ring, but with his hands in hers, trembling slightly. I didn't grow up with your world, Clara said. But I know how to hold a line, Ethan. I've held it in emergency rooms at 3 a.m., in courtrooms with social workers, in waiting rooms with grieving families. I'm not afraid of suits. Ethan kissed her knuckles. You're extraordinary. No, she said. I'm just a girl who's finally sure of what she wants. They sat like that for a long time, the storm outside growing louder, the lightning echoing through the glass like distant applause. A week later, a press release hit every major outlet in the UK. Hawthorne Group announces joint foundation with NHS, Clara Bennett Initiative to launch 50 million aid program, and below that, a photo. Ethan and Clara, side by side, smiling, not polished, not posed, just two people in love, willing to rebuild the world, together. The wedding didn't happen in a cathedral. It didn't take place in a stately home or private vineyard or one of the London venues reserved for people with names that came with hyphens. Instead, it happened in Manchester, in a garden tucked behind an old library where wild roses grew through iron fencing and daffodils pushed through cracks in the concrete. It wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to be, but it was theirs. 6 months after the launch of the Clara Bennett Initiative, Clara stood behind a folding screen in the garden's old greenhouse, adjusting the sleeves of her dress. It wasn't designer, it wasn't couture. It was soft and simple, and the color of cream just before it turns to gold. Her hair was pulled back with a comb that had belonged to her mother. Lucy adjusted the back of her dress, then held up a mirror. Ready? Clara looked at her reflection. She didn't feel like a stranger anymore. I am. Outside, Ethan was pacing by the archway of fairy lights strung between two gnarled apple trees. He wore a grey-blue suit, his father's cufflinks, and a boutonniere Clara had made herself. White lily, sprig of rosemary, and a single wild daisy. Vivienne approached, elegant as ever, but softer tonight. She looked at her brother for a long moment. You okay? Terrified, he said. Good, she replied. Means you're about to do something real. He smiled. She changed everything. Then hold on to her, with both hands. There were only 60 guests. No photographers, no press, no sponsors. Just the people who mattered. NHS colleagues, childhood friends, a few stubborn Hawthorne shareholders who had come around after seeing the foundation's success. And children, so many children, including Leo Simmons, now 9, who carried the rings with a grin so wide it nearly split his face. Clara walked down the aisle alone, but she didn't feel alone. She felt seen, known, loved. After the vows were spoken and the rings exchanged, simple bands engraved with the phrase "We hold the line," there was dancing under string lights, speeches that made everyone laugh and cry, and a first dance to Nina Simone's "Feeling Good." Later, when most of the guests had wandered to the makeshift bar or out into the moonlit garden, Clara and Ethan sat on a bench near the old stone wall, shoes kicked off, fingers intertwined. "Is this what you imagined?" Ethan asked. "Not even close," Clara said. "It's better. Even with my terrible dancing? Especially with your terrible dancing?" He kissed her hand, then pulled something from his coat pocket. A folder. "What's this?" she asked. "Something I wanted to give you before the honeymoon." Inside was a document, the deed to a building on Oldham Street, a 2-story structure with high ceilings and good bones. "Ethan, it's yours," he said, "for the foundation, a real office, a community hub, clinics, whatever you dream." She looked up at him, stunned. "I want to build the future around you," he said, "not just beside you." Clara leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then let's do it right. Together." In the months that followed, the world changed for both of them. The Clara Bennett initiative expanded to 3 cities, then 5. It funded after-hours clinics, mental health services for working families, mobile dental vans for underserved schools. Nurses were paid better. Community centers reopened. Young students saw paths into healthcare careers that had never seemed possible before. And Clara became something more than a nurse, more than a name in headlines. She became a force. She still took shifts at the hospital, 2 a month minimum. It kept her grounded. It reminded her who she was. And every Sunday morning, she and Ethan walked through Piccadilly Gardens hand in hand, sometimes stopping on the same bench where it all began. Once a young woman approached them, nervous, maybe 19. "Excuse me," she said, "I'm studying nursing, and I just wanted to say thank you for the work you're doing, for making people like me believe we can matter." Clara smiled and took her hand. "You already do." On the first anniversary of the foundation, Clara stood on the steps of the newly opened clinic in Salford, looking out at the crowd. She hadn't prepared a speech. She didn't need one. "I thought I was just helping a boy with a broken bike," she said, voice steady. "But what I didn't realize is that that moment helped fix something in me too. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change the course of a life. Sometimes it changes more than one, and sometimes it changes everything." The crowd erupted in applause, and in the back, under the shade of an old sycamore, Ethan watched her, pride etched deep in his face, not because she had become a symbol, but because she had never stopped being her. The woman who knelt in the rain, the woman who chose to stay, the woman who turned a single moment into a lifetime of purpose. And beside her, he had finally become the man who knew what it meant to love without calculation, to give without needing to be seen, to build, not empires, but homes. He walked up the steps and took her hand. She smiled. "Ready for the next chapter?" he whispered. "I already turned the page," she said. And together they stepped into a future neither of them had planned, but both of them had made possible.